Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Russia is firing waves of missiles at Ukraine. Ukraine is targeting more Russian towns. A nuclear plant has been caught in the crossfire. The global nuclear watchdog is warning of another Chernobyl. Zelensky is asking the West to deliver long-range weapons. Prime Minister Modi dialed Putin and Biden. Tonight we'll bring you up to speed with the action on the battlefield and the politics around it. In another part of the world, two rivals sit down for talks. China and the US. Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, has landed in Beijing. We'll look at the agenda and the back-channel efforts that led to this meeting. Meanwhile, the Western war on Chinese electric vehicles continues. Canada becomes the latest country to slap 100% tariffs on China-made EVs. In Kolkata, the government cracks down on protests over the rape and murder of a doctor. In Kerala, the top body of the film industry resigns over the systemic exploitation of women. In Australia, the government is capping the number of international students who can study in the country. Canada has already done this. What explains these moves and what does it mean for students who are looking to study abroad? In Libya, there are two rival governments. One of them has shut down the country's oil fields. We'll explain. In Pakistan, they're looking to AI to pick the cricket team. We're not making this up. And research shows what most of you probably already know. Thinking hurts. That and more coming up. The headlines first. Was there a bid to topple the Mohamed Muizzu government in the Maldives? The police launched a probe. Last week, the country's main commercial bank had reduced the foreign exchange spending allowed for Maldivians. The move had sparked widespread anger. President Muizzu called it an attempt to overthrow his government. The UAE seeks consular access to Telegram CEO Pavel Durov. Last Saturday, the Dubai-based tech chief was arrested in France. Durov has been accused of failing to curb the spread of illegal content on Telegram. The Kremlin has warned France against trying to intimidate the Russian-born billionaire. Chinese military stages live fire drills near the border with Myanmar. This follows recent bilateral talks on security in the area. Myanmar's junta has clashed often with the ethnic rebels in the northern Shan state. Beijing is a major ally and arms supplier to the junta, but it has also maintained ties with the ethnic armed groups. Israel rescues a hostage from Gaza as truce talks continue in Cairo. Egypt, Qatar and the US are mediating the ceasefire talks. Israel wants to keep control of the Philadelphia corridor along the Gaza-Egypt border. It's a key sticking point since both Egypt and Hamas oppose the move. And flash floods in the Sudan kill at least 30 people. Several villages also washed away after a dam collapsed. Since last month, war-torn Sudan has been battling heavy rains. The country's fragile infrastructure has been decimated by the civil war, which began last year.
Америка, Британія, Франція, інші партнери мають силу, щоб допомогти нам зупинити терор.
It's a relentless onslaught from Russia, something we haven't seen in a while. For months, the battle was being fought in the trenches, close and intense fighting. But this week, Russia dusted off the missiles. The first wave of strikes was on Monday. Hundreds of drones and missiles targeted Ukrainian cities. And today it continued. Russia confirmed that 10 missiles and 81 drones were fired today. Around half the missiles were shot down, along with 60 drones. And the rest? They hit Ukraine's power infrastructure. As a result, blackouts were reported in many cities. Let me pull up the map for you. Around 20 cities were targeted on Monday and Tuesday, some in the west, like Lviv, but mostly in eastern and central Ukraine, which means that this is a significantly large-scale attack. civilian buildings were hit too. A hotel was struck in the city of Kyiv. 2 people were killed in the attack and 5 others were injured. Take a look at the damage. In Zaporizhia, Russia struck a house. Survivors say the drone hit the building at around 2 a.m. local time. Some of them escaped the rubble, but 2 people were killed. So that's 4 fatalities today, plus 5 deaths on Monday. So Russia's strategy is clear: attack civilian and power infrastructure. Another winter will soon be upon Ukraine, so power stations are prime targets. By attacking them, Russia is hoping to cripple Ukraine's morale. But 2 questions remain. 1, is it working? And 2, why now? Well, President Zelensky is getting desperate. He's been asking for fighter jets and long-range missiles. Without them, Ukraine is a sitting duck. Yes, you can shoot down some of the missiles, but you cannot hit back.
Each of these strikes repeatedly brings us back to the task of long-range capabilities. The need to provide our defense forces with enough long-range weapons that can destroy terrorists exactly in the areas of their strikes. Defenders of life should face no restrictions on weapons. While Russia uses all kinds of its own weapons, as well as Shahid drones and ballistic missiles from North Korea, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and other partners have the power to help us stop terror.
Let me explain Zelensky's logic here. Russia fires most of its drones and missiles from nearby regions like Belgorod or Kursk or Crimea or the Black Sea. So Zelensky says, give me long-range weapons. We will destroy these launch sites before Russia can fire. It's a very ambitious and dangerous plan, which is why the West has not agreed yet. The US has promised more air defense systems, but not long-range arms.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms Russia's continued war against Ukraine and its efforts to plunge the Ukrainian people into darkness. We're going to continue to lead that coalition of more than 50 countries in providing much-needed military equipment for Ukraine. That certainly includes air defense systems and interceptors, which proved so critical in helping defend Ukraine against these attacks.
So that answers the first question. Is it working? Yes, it is. Ukraine is getting worried. The second question is, why this escalation now? Probably because of Kursk. Earlier this month, Ukraine breached Russia's borders. They have advanced 35 kilometers into Russia. They claim to control 100 settlements and 600 Russian prisoners of war. It was definitely a daring operation because all of a sudden, Ukraine had the initiative. They had prisoners and land to bargain with. And to some extent, it did work. Russia agreed to a prisoner swap on Saturday. They exchanged around 230 prisoners. But days later, Russia launched this attack. The idea is to take back the initiative, to pull Ukraine's focus away from Kursk. But Kyiv won't give up easily. They're pushing further into Russian territory, and they're destroying strategic infrastructure on the way, like bridges and airfields. Take a look at these satellite pictures. Now, Kyiv's goal is quite clear: use this captured land to negotiate with Moscow. But it's a very risky plan. Like I said, Ukraine is 35 kilometers inside Russian land, so the supply lines are stretched. How long before Russia cuts them off? And don't forget the other front. Ukraine may be making gains in Kursk, but they're also losing ground on the eastern front, where the actual war is unfolding. The army chief himself has admitted that it's a tough fight.
The situation on the Pokrovsk front is fairly difficult. Throughout the last week, 50 battles take place per day on average. The enemy is using its advantage in personnel, weapons and military equipment. Russia is actively using artillery and aviation.
Do you see the absurdity of this? Ukraine is capturing land it has no intention of holding, all the while losing land that it already has. This is a very dangerous spiral. It makes you wonder who's talking about peace here. Surprisingly, China is. Their special envoy held talks with Indonesia, Brazil and South Africa. Afterwards, he urged nations to support China's peace plan. Russia has said that it's open to it, but Ukraine is non-committal. And talk about timing. China remembers peace immediately after the Indian Prime Minister visited Kyiv. Modi actually spoke to Putin today. He told him the same thing that he told Zelensky, that India wants an early and peaceful resolution. Yesterday, Prime Minister Modi also spoke to US President Joe Biden. He briefed Biden on his visit to Kyiv. He also called for a peaceful resolution of the war. But recent events suggest the opposite. This war has already put one nuclear facility in danger. If Ukraine has its way, it could soon be two. So Russia is ramping up strikes in Ukraine, but inside Russia, a more dangerous situation is developing. Moscow says Ukraine wants to take a nuclear plant, the Kursk nuclear facility. Intense fighting is on barely 40 kilometers from this plant.
Ёбаный в рот, текайте, блядь! Нахуй и мы текаем, блядь, ёбаный в рот! Валим нахуй отсюда, хули вы снимаете, поехали! Блядь!
Взорвалась бочка.
А я не слышала.
Ну вот же, глянь. Вот это уже плохо. Вот это уже плохо.
Мне страшно.
Это сейчас они все бабахнут.
Уходим отсюда. Мне жарко уже.
Все.
Ukraine is intensifying its operations inside Russia. The video you just saw came out earlier this month. Ukraine has been going after Russia's critical infrastructure. In this instance, an oil depot was hit by a Ukrainian drone, and there have been other attacks like this one. Moscow is raising an alarm about it now. Last week, Vladimir Putin made a big claim. He said Ukraine tried to strike the nuclear plant in Kursk.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has been informed. They promised to come themselves to send specialists to assess the situation. I hope that, in the end, this will be done on their part.
He mentioned the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. That's the United Nations nuclear watchdog. The IAEA is deeply concerned. The agency chief traveled to Kursk today. They're calling the situation an emergency.
I was informed about impact of drones. I was shown some of the remnants of those and signs of the impact they had. The fact that the plant is operating make it even more serious in terms of an eventual action against it. When a plant is operating, the temperature is much higher, and if there was the case of an impact or something that could affect there would be serious consequences.
Ukraine has not said anything about this yet, but it's fairly obvious. Ukrainian forces are trying to move closer to this facility. The Kursk plant is one of Russia's top nuclear power stations. It is around 60 kilometers away from the Russia-Ukraine border. Moscow fears that Ukrainian forces could launch an attack soon. Security at the plant has been heightened. Its employees have been sent on a leave. Instead, Russian troops have been deployed there. They've been digging trenches around the site. So this nuclear plant is now part of an active war zone. Rafael Grossi has issued warnings. He's the Director General of the IAEA, the man you just heard from. He says the Kursk facility is within artillery range, meaning Ukrainian forces could strike this plant from a distance, and that could lead to a disaster, something like the Chernobyl accident of 1986, or even worse. Let me tell you why. The Kursk facility is not a modern nuclear plant. It still uses old Soviet technology. Its reactors do not have any extra layers of protection around them, and that makes them quite dangerous. Consider what Rossi said, and I'm quoting, "They don't have a protective dome around them, just a normal roof, which means the reactor's core is pretty exposed." So the reactors are vulnerable. What if a rocket dropped on this facility? Or if one of the reactors was struck by artillery? There could be a massive disaster, a catastrophic meltdown, just like Chernobyl, which was the worst nuclear disaster in human history. The explosion released more radiation than the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima, over 400 times more. The disaster has made Chernobyl inhabitable. No one would be able to live there for 20,000 years because of radiation. Now Kursk in Russia faces a similar risk. The reactors here run on the same technology as Chernobyl. It's called the RBMK. That's the technology. Earlier, this plant had 4 reactors. They were built before the Chernobyl disaster and used the same RBMK technology. Today, only 2 reactors are operational, but the risk of a massive disaster still remains. And to make it worse, the Russian town of Kursk is nearby. Civilians live close to the nuclear facility. Bomb shelters are being installed there now. The locals are worried about their safety.
There are concerns, of course. It is happening here, at our borders. We have faith in our soldiers.
Sometimes it can be quite loud. The kids were initially worried, but I explained to my older daughter that we are being protected. The air defense system is activated. It means everyone is informed.
Soldiers should not fight near a nuclear power plant. That is just common sense. But throughout this war, nuclear plants have been caught in the crossfire. First, it was Zaporizhia, where the fighting still hasn't stopped, by the way. Just a few weeks ago, one of the towers at Zaporizhia was attacked. And now Kursk is under threat. This madness needs to end. We can only hope for cooler heads to prevail, although the intensifying attacks between Ukraine and Russia are not reassuring. They're putting the whole world at risk. In international relations, what would you consider the most important bilateral relationship in the world? I would argue it should involve the 2 biggest global powers. And as things stand today, that means the US and China. The countries do not seem to like each other. They keep making hostile moves against one another, but the US and China still try and maintain some stability. It's not an out-and-out conflict just yet. There are multiple reasons for this, and here is one of them.
I'm looking forward to this afternoon, this evening, and tomorrow, where we'll delve into a wide range of issues, including issues on which we agree and those issues on where there are still differences that we need to manage effectively and substantively. And it will be, I think, a very productive round of conversations.
That is the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. He landed in Beijing this morning. He's meeting China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
The China-U.S. relationship is critical to both countries and has a bearing on the world. Over the past few years, the bilateral relations have gone through twists and turns. I hope, as always, the communication will remain strategic, but also substantive. And of course, at the same time, constructive.
Wang Yi said the US-China relationship has gone through twists and turns. Well, that's downplaying it. The countries don't see eye to eye on any issue. Let's go through the major flashpoints, starting with the Ukraine war. The US supports Ukraine, China supports Russia. Beijing opposes and ignores Western sanctions on Moscow. It helps prop up the Russian economy and military-industrial complex. So obviously, the US has an axe to grind. China, on the other hand, has an issue with US trade policy. The Biden administration has banned advanced computer chip exports to China. It has tried to slow down China's technological advancement. Washington says it's a national security issue, but Beijing sees this as a trade war. That's the second major issue between them. The third issue is the most important to China, and that is Taiwan. China sees Taiwan as part of its territory, even though it has never governed the island directly. But China has vowed to reunify Taiwan with the mainland, using force if necessary. The US, however, supports Taiwan. It provides weapons and military training to the island's forces. This is China's biggest problem with the US. Beijing accuses Washington of meddling in its domestic issues and encouraging separatism. That is the third and arguably biggest flashpoint between China and the US. Now let's come back to the meeting between Jake Sullivan and Wang Yi. The two of them are holding talks for 2 days, today and tomorrow. They plan to discuss the points I just mentioned and some other issues, like the drug, fentanyl. Fentanyl is causing an overdose epidemic in the US. China produces the chemicals that are used to make this drug. So Washington wants to work with Beijing to crack down on these fentanyl precursors. Now, this is not the first time that Jake Sullivan and Wang Yi are having a meeting. It's actually the fourth time. They met in Austria's capital, Vienna, last May, in Malta last September, and in Thailand's capital, Bangkok, this January. Across these meetings, the same points have been discussed: the war in Ukraine, the US-China chip war, and Taiwan. These issues have been discussed at length, but they've not been resolved. So expect the same thing to happen yet again. These latest talks in Beijing, will not solve the major issues. Then what's the point of these meetings? Well, both China and the US know that talks do not resolve anything, in fact. But both sides still believe that they're useful. They allow Beijing and Washington to put their points across, try and correct any misunderstandings, and work towards cooling down tensions. And these talks are a great example of back-channel diplomacy. Clandestine talks between rival nations aimed at keeping tensions from rising further. That is the true purpose of Jake Sullivan's visit, to try and prevent any surprises in the next few months. The US is heading for elections. It will pick a new president this November. The last thing Joe Biden and his Democratic Party need is some sort of flare-up with China. Jake Sullivan will try and ensure that there are no surprises. He might also try and arrange for a meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping, but again, don't expect any concrete results from the meeting. The Sullivan-Wong talks, the US-China back channel, is not about solutions. Its real purpose is preventing existing tensions from exploding. Which brings us to Canada. It's picking a battle with China. Ottawa has imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, that's electric vehicles. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says China has an unfair advantage, so he wants to prevent that by slapping a 100% tax on imports. Beijing, on the other hand, has slammed this move. It has called it protectionism. Now, Canada is not the first country to do something like this. The US imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs in the month of May. The European Union, too, has hiked tariffs on Chinese cars. So this move by Canada is part of a wider battle between the West and China. Will it escalate in the coming days? And who has the advantage in this EV showdown? Our next report tells you.
We will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
With that, Canada has followed America's lead. It's imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, that's electric vehicles. What does that mean? A tariff is a tax imposed by any government on imported goods. A 100% tariff means the importer will have to pay a tax equal to the value of the item. For example, a Chinese EV costs around $30,000. Canada imposes a 100% tariff. So the total cost of the car would be $60,000. Basically, it makes Chinese EVs much more expensive. So why is Canada doing this? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says China has a policy of overcapacity. What he means is Chinese EV makers get government subsidies, and that means they can make cheap cars. These cars then flood overseas markets, and that impacts EV industries in other countries. Ottawa wants that to stop.
We are transforming Canada's automotive sector to be a global leader in building the vehicles of tomorrow. But actors like China have chosen to give themselves an unfair advantage in the global marketplace, compromising the security of our critical industries and displacing dedicated Canadian autos and metalwork.
China is Canada's second largest trading partner. So what is Beijing saying? It's calling it trade protectionism. China says this is against the WTO rules, that's the World Trade Organization. Beijing also claims Ottawa's move undermines the global economic system.
It is important to emphasize that Canada's actions ignore objective facts, disregard WTO rules, and go against historical trends, representing a typical protectionist approach.
So, how much will this ban impact China? Well, not very much. Currently, Canada only imports one Chinese-made EV car. It's Tesla. No other Chinese-made EVs are sold in the country, so the damage won't be too much. But Canada is not alone in this battle. There's a massive EV trade war that's brewing, and it's China versus the West. In May, America slapped a 100% duty on Chinese EVs. In July, the EU raised tariffs on Chinese EVs to 37.6%. The West says it's against China's subsidies to the EV industry. They believe it gives Chinese car makers an unfair advantage. So they're imposing tariffs to negate that. But will it really help? China makes up for 60% of all electric vehicle sales. In 2022, China sold 5.9 million EVs. Meanwhile, the rest of the world only sold over 4 million. Plus, they tend to be cheaper. That's because of the subsidies. And also because batteries are manufactured by Chinese companies. All this gives Chinese EVs a competitive edge. They can sell EVs for as little as $12,000. So how is the West trying to fight back? It's already imposing tariffs on Chinese cars, but just doing that won't help. So some governments are also offering tax breaks, which brings us to the EV industry. The global EV market could be worth $900 billion by 2030. China is looking at the EV industry as the key to its future development. The West is geared to prevent it, which means this war will get even more intense in the days to come.
That's what happened in Kolkata today. Absolute chaos. We saw tear gas being fired, water cannons being used, and lathi charges against protesters. In other words, a heavy crackdown. But what led to this violence? A West Bengal student's body had called for a protest march today. It's called Chhatra Samaj, meaning Society of Students. Their plan was to march to the state secretariat in Kolkata, and their demand that Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee must resign. Hundreds of students marched with the tricolour, but they soon faced opposition. Kolkata police said that this march was illegal. Apparently, no permission was sought for the protest. Plus, the secretariat is restricted area, so the cops pushed back, and that's when violence erupted. Protesters broke barricades and threw stones at the police. In response, the cops fired tear gas and water cannons. Take a look. A couple of things to note here. One, the protesting doctors did not support this march. They're holding a separate one tomorrow. Secondly, other student groups also stayed away. The likes of SFI and DYFY, these are left-wing student groups. They have a strong presence in West Bengal, but they did not join this march. And why is that? Because there is a political battle around it. Mamata Banerjee's TMC party says that this march was organized by the RSS. That's the ideological parent of the BJP. The left parties have also said the same thing, which is why they did not join this strike. Some TMC leaders have made serious allegations, in fact. They say that BJP leaders conspired with Chhatra Samaj to create unrest, to disturb law and order in Kolkata. Now, the BJP has rejected this claim. The Chhatra Samaj has also said that it's apolitical, but the controversy won't die down. The BJP has called for a 12-hour strike tomorrow. They're protesting the crackdown against students. But the TMC, the ruling party, says they won't let it happen. that all shops, offices and markets will remain open. So expect more showdown tomorrow. But frankly, it's all disappointing. We are talking about very serious issues here, like how do we ensure the safety of women? How do we keep our doctors safe? The answers do not lie in tear-gassing students. They lie in informed discussion. Political parties in West Bengal must realize that, especially the ruling Trinamool Congress. They have a lot of questions to answer. A new video from the crime scene has been leaked. It shows several people inside the college seminar hall, the place where the murder happened. A lot of people were there. Among them is Dr. Sandeep Ghosh. He was then principal of the R.G. Kar Medical College. He's also on the CBI's radar. Apparently, he ran a mafia inside the college. So the obvious question is, what was he doing there? Did he and the others alter the crime scene? The Kolkata police say they did not. Apparently, this video was shot. This video, in fact, shows the outside of the seminar hall, an area that was not sealed off. But let's face it, it's not a good look. The CBI has also carried out another round of polygraph tests. Both the principal and the accused were grilled in these tests, the lie detector test. The details have not been released yet. Meanwhile, there is some progress on the reform front. The Supreme Court had formed a task force to ensure the safety of doctors. That task force met today. Again, we don't have the details, but they will have to move fast because an interim report must be filed within 3 weeks. Maybe that will nudge things forward. As for the West Bengal government, this is a major challenge, possibly the biggest since Mamata Banerjee took charge as Chief Minister. This is a state where power resides in the streets. First, the left parties dominated it. Now Mamata Banerjee does. But if you lose the streets, you're vulnerable. So all eyes will be on the Chief Minister. Her response until now has been all over the place. We'll have to wait and see if she can get a grip on the situation. It's a Me Too moment for Mollywood. That's the Malayalam film industry. It's called Mollywood. There are new allegations every day. More and more women are speaking up. Big wigs are facing the music. There are calls for strict action. It's a story we've been tracking from the word go, and right now a lot is happening here. Today, superstar Mohanlal resigned as the president of the AMMA. That's the Association of Malayalam Movie Artists. It's the most powerful industry body in Mollywood. And not just Mohanlal, the entire executive committee has stepped down. I have their statement with me. This is what it says. In light of allegations made by some actors against some of the committee members, AMMA has decided to dissolve the executive committee, taking moral responsibility. So the entire body is out. Elections will be held in 2 months. New members will replace them. Now, the AMMA is a state-run film body. It was formed in 1994. It consists of 498 members, and that makes it a powerful collective in the industry. And why is it under the scanner? Because of the Hema Committee report, which came out last week. This report detailed harassment in the Malayalam film industry. The report was released on the 19th of August, but the AMMA sat on it. For 4 days, they did not even respond. And when they did decide to respond, it was a blatant denial. They denied any knowledge of abuse. They said there was no power group. More importantly, they fielded this man. His name is Siddiq. He's a veteran Malayalam actor, also the AMMA's General Secretary. He addressed that press conference where they brushed it off. But here's what happened just days later. Siddiq himself was accused of rape. And so was another top member, which meant that the AMMA had no moral high ground left. They got the benefit of doubt. They had the time to do the right thing, but now their time is up, so the body has been dissolved. It has dissolved itself, rather. It's a move in the right direction, but it's far from enough. Let's go back to the Hema Committee report. It mentions a power group. In fact, the report talks about it almost 70 times, 70 mentions of this power group. This group consists of 10 to 15 people. They wield all the power in the film industry in Kerala. Basically, your biggest actors, producers and directors. But here's the important caveat. They are all men. Now, this group expected everyone to toe their line. If someone did not, they were handed an invisible ban. Such people won't get any roles or work, no matter how hard they tried. Directors wouldn't cast them, producers wouldn't fund their films, and distributors would not circulate those films. So it was as good as losing your job. And a lot of women did. Why? Because they did not cater to the whims and fancies of this power group. In fact, women were targeted if they did not stand up in their presence. Just imagine that. We are in the 21st century, yet women are expected to stand when a powerful man walks in. And there's a painful irony here. In the last few years, Mollywood has found a new fan base because of its progressive cinema. This is an industry that's smaller than its Tamil or Telugu counterparts. Small films are made on a budget of just about 5 crore rupees. A medium-range film can go up to 15 crores, and yet they're making big money. In the first quarter of this year, 2024, they surpassed 100,000 crore rupees in global earnings. And they make a lot of movies. In 2023, some 200 Malayalam films were released. That's as much as Bollywood. 50% of these movies were made by first-time producers. They allowed the industry to experiment. There were progressive themes, bold storytelling, and films that broke societal norms. Most of them have a cross-cultural appeal. And with the rise of streaming, Mollywood now has a national audience. But real and real life are two very different things. On one hand, you make movies about women breaking stereotypes. On the other, you deny rights to those very women. You sexually exploit them. It's a glaring hypocrisy that the Hema Committee report has exposed. So women are speaking up, and Mollywood is being forced to confront its own dark underbelly, to question its skewed power dynamics. These filmmakers and artists have a choice. Their industry is a symbol of progressive storytelling. They can help it become more. A space where on-screen values are reflected off-screen too. It is time for Kerala cinema to break the ultimate stereotype, to stop silencing women behind the scenes. Our next story is about education. Every year, more than 1 million people from India head abroad for higher education. They go to colleges in countries like the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. Indians are among the most common foreign students in these countries, followed by students from China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia. But now some countries are trying to cut down on international students. Australia is the latest.
About 10% more international students in our universities today than before the pandemic, and about 50% more in our private vocational and training providers. Today I can announce that, subject to the bill passing, the overall number of international students starting a course next year will be set at 270,000. This includes higher education courses and vocational education and training courses.
Australia has put a cap on international students. In 2025, only 270,000 international students will be allowed into the country. 270,000 students. Each type of education institution will get a separate quota. Public universities will be allowed to take 145,000 students. Private universities can bring in 30,000 students, and vocational education institutions will get 95,000. Each individual college and training institute will have its own limit. Places like Melbourne University and Sydney University have been given their caps. They are currently studying the impact of these limits. Perhaps they will take a look at Canada for insights, because Canada also put a limit on student enrollments this year. The limit was announced in January. Canada decreased study permits for international students by 35%. It also seemed to be targeting the foreign students, which seems a bit strange. After all, why would you want to kill a golden goose? Foreign students bring in billions of dollars. They pay higher tuition fee, meaning they subsidize the education of locals. Look at Australia's case. Education is the country's fourth largest export. Foreign students brought in almost $25 billion in 2022-23, $25 billion. So then why would Canberra try and limit this? Why would Ottawa? Well, the simple answer is politics. Both Australia and Canada face a housing crisis. Rents are through the roof. The Australian property prices are up 40% since the pandemic, and the locals blame migrants for this. Both Australia and Canada encouraged immigration after the pandemic, so the locals feel that migrants are leading to rising rents. This has led to an anti-migrant sentiment in these countries, and the governments cannot ignore this. Both Australia and Canada have elections next year. The ruling parties want to stay in power, so to make the locals happy, they're targeting migrants, specifically international students. So if you're someone who wants to study abroad, how should you interpret all this? Well, foreigners, even international students, are soft targets. Most governments face housing problems because of their own incompetence. But they'll never admit to that. So they'll find any scapegoat they can. It's students right now, but the scope will widen. In Canada, they've already expanded the net. They're restricting temporary foreign workers as well. Australia may follow suit. And this might impact job prospects after college. So even if you get a study permit, it could still be an uphill battle. Most international students go abroad for better economic opportunities. They spend exorbitant sums of money in the hopes of securing a better life. But it has always been a gamble, and they've always been at the mercy of their host countries. That part has not changed. It was always a struggle, and it seems to have become a little bit harder now. But that's unlikely to deter the millions seeking a life abroad. Our next story is from the North African country of Libya. Its biggest source of income is oil, which accounts for more than 60% of its GDP. Libya has two governments, two rival governments, but only one is recognized internationally. That's the Tripoli government in the west. What about the unrecognized one? It is sitting on the oil wells. The unrecognized government controls most of Libya's oil, and this week they announced the shutdown of oil fields. This comes after days of power struggle between the two rivals. They're both trying to control Libya's central bank and plunging the already struggling nation into more chaos. Here's a report.
Libya has a lot going on. Territorial divisions, political turmoil, financial and security instability. The North African country is struggling to recover. And its only hope is its oil. Libya is oil-rich. It produces 1.2 million barrels per day. More than 1 million are exported to the global market. This is a solid source of revenue for the country. But this week, this too is at risk. Libya is shutting down oil fields. Well, not Libya, so to speak. Its eastern-based government. You see, Libya remains divided between two governments. On the one hand, there's the government based in the capital, Tripoli. It's led by Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh. Then there's the rival administration, the unrecognized government in the eastern city of Benghazi. It is backed by military strongman Khalifa Haftar. So the eastern government is not internationally recognized. But it has the military support. And guess what? It also has the oil. Most of Libya's oil fields are located in regions controlled by the eastern government. This week, their head, Osama Hamad, took to social media, and he rattled the nation.
The Libyan government declares a state of force majeure on all oil fields, halting oil production and exports until further notice, and calls on all competent authorities affiliated with the Libyan government, each according to his position and responsibilities, to put this matter into effect urgently.
The Benghazi government has not specified the details about how many oil fields will be closed, if this will apply to all terminals and oil facilities as well, and for how long. But it's expected that 90% of the country's oil fields will take a hit. Tripoli says that the oil fields should not be shut down under flimsy pretexts. The UN is trying to resolve the matter, and the US is backing the efforts. But the Benghazi government remains undeterred. Now, while most of the oil fields may be controlled by the Eastern government, the oil revenues are managed by the central bank based in the capital. The bank has long been independent of the two rival governments. It is also a vital source of income for the country. For days now, the two governments are fighting over the bank's leadership. Recently, the Tripoli government fired the bank's chief, putting a new temporary bank governor in his place. Violence erupted, and so did anger. This unilateral move irked the Benghazi government and plunged the central bank into crisis, affecting banking functions across Libya.
The political problems and the competition over the leadership of the central bank should be resolved, and citizens shouldn't be caught in the crossfire.
They've cut off electricity, cash is scarce, and there's even a shortage of gasoline. They won't let us move, live, or work. Honestly, I have no idea where they're trying to take us.
The oil disruption will only exacerbate their woes. So while the power-hungry rivals fight for control, the citizens have to bear the consequences.
These are tough times for Pakistan cricket. They're getting beaten at home, their team is divided and fans are losing patience. But do not worry. The Pakistan Cricket Board's chief has found a savior: artificial intelligence. You see, Pakistan is starting a new domestic tournament. It's called the Champions Cup. The tournament will have 5 teams and 150 players. Now, the obvious question is, who selects these 150 players? According to the board, most of it was done by the computer.
मैं आपको एक चीज़ बता दूं, ये जो 150 बंदा भी सिलेक्ट हुआ है, 80% उसमें कंप्यूटर का रोल है, 20% ह्यूमन हैंड है, और वो एक कोई बंदा चैलेंज नहीं कर सकता, जहां मर्जी चले जाए। आपके साथ आई थिंक जब ये फाइनल करेंगे तो आपके साथ शेयर करेंगे, ताकि और मैं कहूँगा कि अगर कहीं पे कोई लेफ्ट राइट हुआ तो आप मुझे बताएं।
There are 2 kinds of statements, those that do not require an explanation and those that definitely do. This one was the latter. How is a computer selecting a cricket squad? Is it filtering through player statistics? Is it looking at recent form? Or is it some other criteria? Whatever it is, some clarity would have helped. But I guess it was just a matter of time. We're using AI in business, we're using AI in education, so sports was a natural candidate. The only question is, how is it being used? Only the PCB or the Pakistan Cricket Board can answer that question. But it does reveal a larger problem in Pakistan cricket, the lack of ideas. We've seen tech companies do it recently. Don't have a new product? Just add artificial intelligence to an existing one. It's called AI washing, and it reveals the larger problem in Pakistan cricket. In the 80s and 90s, they were a dominant team. Under Imran Khan, Pakistan won the World Cup in 1992. They had a pace attack that was feared by the whole world. But now they're losing at home. Pakistan last won a home test match in 2021. They're ranked 7th in T20 cricket and 6th in test cricket. So fans are asking, what is happening to Pakistan? The first problem is leadership, both on and off the pitch. Pakistan cricket has had 5 chairpersons since 2021. So the board is always in a mess. Elections are rarely held on time, and when they are held, they're not fair. Same with captaincy. Babar Azam resigned the captaincy after last year's World Cup in India. So Pakistan got 2 new captains, Shaheen Afridi for the T20s and Shan Masood for Test cricket. Media reports talked of a rift inside the team, and it showed in the results. So guess what the board did? In March this year, they reinstated Babar Azam. Ask any expert and they will tell you, teams need stability and clarity. This sort of churn will create divisions and affect performance. Which brings us to the second problem, a poor domestic setup. Just look at the top cricketing nations in the world, India, Australia, England, South Africa. What do they have in common? A robust domestic cricket structure. In India, we have the Ranji Trophy. It is not perfect, but it's better than Pakistan. Reports say their domestic selections are not based on merit. Apparently, players get picked from dummy clubs. As a result, the tournament quality is low. Which brings us to the last reason, Pakistan's own security issues. You may remember what happened in 2009. Terrorists attacked Sri Lanka's team bus in Lahore. After that, no team came to Pakistan. The situation improved only in 2019, a full 10 years later. A few foreign teams have started playing in Pakistan, but the big fish is not budging, and that is India. You see, every country is keen to host India because hosting India means record television deals. But Pakistan has missed out on that since 2008, since the Mumbai terror attacks. And they can only blame themselves. Same with cricket leagues. India started the IPL in 2008. The tournament is a cash cow for Indian cricket. It has turned India into a cricketing superpower. Pakistan too have their own league. It's called the Pakistan Super League. It was set up in 2015 with much less fanfare. Again, the reason was the same, security concerns. The PSL is worth around $330 million. The IPL, the Indian League, is worth around $16 billion. So Pakistan's cricketing decline is not really about talent. On their day, they can beat anyone. It's about systemic issues like corruption, politics, and security challenges. They need someone who can reset Pakistan's cricket board, someone who commands respect. I know a good candidate, but he's in Rawalpindi's Adiala jail. I guess that's the problem with Pakistan. Cricketers want power, army generals want power, so no one is doing what they're supposed to be doing. For the sake of old rivalry, let's see if Pakistan can get back on track. I know it's only Tuesday, the weekend is still far away, but here's a question for you. Do you like to think? Let me rephrase. Do you like to sit in one place without any device, without pen and paper, without speaking to anyone else, and just think? If you're human, you most likely don't. Because apparently, thinking hurts. A new study says so, and several others agree. They say you will do everything in your power to avoid thinking. But how far are you willing to go? About a decade ago, researchers at the Harvard University conducted a study. They recruited students and ushered them into a room alone without any books, phones, or any kind of material. The room was completely empty, barring one piece of furniture, which was a chair with lots of wires and one button. If the button was pressed, the wires delivered shocks, harmless but uncomfortable shocks. The students were asked to sit in the chair with the wires attached to their skin, and they had to remain seated for about 15 minutes. They could not fall asleep. They simply had to sit there and think, entertain themselves with their thoughts. But what happened next was far from entertaining. The students hated the experience. A few minutes into the study, their minds wandered. They became uncomfortable. They struggled to concentrate, and nothing helped. Some participants hated thinking so much, it drove them to press the button. 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women gave themselves electric shocks sitting in that chair. One man shocked himself 190 times in a span of 15 minutes. So this may shock you, but humans really do hate thinking, to the point that they would prefer a jolt of pain, because thinking is a lot of work. And it can be a painful experience. Not literally, of course. The brain has no nerve ending, so it cannot feel physical pain. So when scientists say that thinking hurts, they don't mean it hurts like the pain in your neck. Thinking hard can be mentally exhausting, much like exercise can wear out the body. And this is subjective. Thinking can make you feel tired. It can make it harder for you to concentrate. It can make you irritable. The pain comes in all shapes and sizes because thinking takes real effort. It eats up the body's resources. It takes energy. It requires sustained attention. And this applies to all kinds of thinking. When you resist scratching an itch, your brain is exerting control. When you're choosing what to wear, your brain is making decisions. When you're being polite to a rude co-worker, your brain is working full time and going against your natural desire to perhaps spew abuse. These things come naturally to people But for every little choice that they make, they are thinking, and this effort can tire the brain. There are ways to avoid the hurt though. Treat thinking like an exercise. First, build your thinking muscle. Research shows that our brains get stronger with effort. And second, know when to take a break. For instance, after a grueling day's work, even if you do something as simple as ordering groceries, you may feel weary because after a day of thinking hard, the brain has slowed down. It can only process so much information. So learn to cut the brain some slack. And the third thing you can do, conserve your mental energy when you can. Humans have a very limited capacity for simultaneous thought, which is why it is impossible to multitask. You may think you're doing it, but scientifically it does not exist. Instead, the brain switches tasks. It chooses which information to process in quick succession. And this means more work and more exhaustion. So reduce the load. The funny thing here is that thinking is the most accessible activity on earth. It is free for all. Yet it comes at a cost. You cannot avoid it, but you can train your brain and know when to push it. Are you a Telegram user in India? If you are, these are worrying times. The app's founder has been arrested in France. But Telegram is facing trouble in India too. The central government is investigating the app for extortion and gambling. So the worry is the app, Telegram, could get banned in India. Now, the Telegram community in India is quite small, around 5 million users in total, which is nothing compared to Instagram or X. Instagram has more than 300 million Indian users. X has around 30 million. But the tiny Telegram community has a dark side. A lot of shady stuff happens there, like sharing pirated movies or betting on sports events. So the news of a possible ban has hit them hard. And how did they react? By making jokes on another social media platform.
छोटी थोड़ा किसको जगह करो क्यों नट्टू काका भी आएंगे अभी अंदर
कसूर क्या हो गया बता दो तो
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Mexico, judicial workers hold a candlelight vigil to protest against a controversial overhaul. Dogs hit the waves in California to train for the annual surfathon. And around 120 tons of tomatoes are on their way to Spain's Buñuel for the Tomatina Festival. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 2008, Barack Obama became the first black candidate to clinch a major party ticket. He became the official Democratic nominee. Obama beat Republican nominee John McCain to become the first African-American president of the US. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. है।